And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hello there, I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan, and this is your Alaska aviation weather outlook on this Wednesday, July 30th, 2025. And to set things up as of this later Wednesday morning, as I promised, we would see an area of rain and rain showers enhance along Cook Inlet, eastern Kenai, south slopes of the Alaska Range, extending northward through Fairbanks. This is the result of some moisture being pulled back to the west by a little trough impulse from the low down here in the North Pacific, combined with the west-northwest flow in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere. So it's providing this region of lift to enhance the precipitation development. So we have a wetter afternoon across south central Alaska as a result of that feature, but that'll be breaking down later tonight rather quickly into Thursday morning. So things are going to start to dry. We'll still have that low sitting out here in the Gulf with a few light showers along the Gulf Coast here or there. More importantly, high pressure ridge that has been over the southeast Bering is expanding back to the north and east, and that'll be the case for the end of this week, Thursday, Friday into Sunday. So expect more in the way of VFR conditions across the central northern interior, with warming temperatures back up into the 70s, especially here through the central interior. In fact, yesterday, on Tuesday afternoon, Togiak hit a high of 79 degrees. It was 75 in Dillingham, so some very warm summer weather there. Further west, we're going to have a couple of impulses of low pressure, a warm front and low lifting across the Aleutians this Wednesday afternoon and evening, with another impulse following as that low sits up here in toward the lower Bering toward the southwestern quadrant. But in the meantime, the pattern is such that we could see into Thursday afternoon an isolated thunderstorm along the east slopes of the Alaska Range into the Talkeetna Mountains, northern Copper River Basin. A lot of VFR conditions expected across this interior from southwest to northeast as a result of that building high pressure across this region. Still some lingering MVFR, a few light showers, sprinkles, parts of the Panhandle, especially maybe north and along areas of the Gulf Coast, back down here toward eastern Kenai, Kodiak Island. And then again, a lot of IFR conditions, low stratus clouds, some fog, some areas of showers or drizzle as a result of this warm, moist flow coming in across from the North Pacific into the over the cooler waters of the Bering. Friday morning, generally MVFR conditions across much of the Panhandle, back into areas of south central, eastern Kenai. And then we find some IFR conditions along the northwest coast there, Utqiagvik down to the Lisburn Peninsula. And then we find some IFR conditions continuing either side of the Alaska Peninsula and covering much of the Bering and the Aleutian chain. And for Friday afternoon, once again, there could be an isolated thunderstorm pop up along and south of the Alaska Range into as far as, and maybe even up there toward the upper Tanana Valley. But otherwise, with that high pressure ridge across this region, warmer, drier temperatures rebounding into the 70s, especially the middle upper Yukon and the lower middle Tanana Valley. So pass conditions on Thursday up there in the east central Brooks Range, Anatuvik and Adigan Pass, generally VFR. As we come down along the west arm of the Alaska Range, Lake Clark, Merrill, MVFR. And as we go a little further north, still MVFR, Rainy Pass, and there at Windy Pass. And then finally, as we get a little further east, Isabel Pass, MVFR becoming VFR, but south of the pass, there could be an isolated thunderstorm develop in vicinity. Same thing, Mentasta Pass, VFR becoming MVFR. There could be a scattered shower, isolated thunderstorm in the vicinity of Mentasta Pass Thursday afternoon and evening. And then for Tanita Pass, also MVFR, perhaps an isolated thunderstorm, especially on the north side of the pass come Thursday afternoon or evening. Portage Pass, generally MVFR conditions should hold Thursday. And also across the northern Panhandle at Chilkoot and White, we expect MVFR conditions. So looking at the freezing levels, the surface freezing line is just off of the Beaufort Sea coastline way to the north. And we find lower freezing levels aloft up there along the eastern Beaufort Sea coast and down here in the North Pacific. This is where we find troughs of low pressure. Here's the low circulation down here and a trough with some cooler air swinging eastward along the Beaufort Sea coast into the Canadian Arctic coast. Back to the west, though, the warm front lifting northward. In the wake of this thing that's currently on Wednesday, we have the warm front low crossing the Aleutians, and that's pulling up into this area of the Bering Sea. So ahead of it, freezing levels aloft rise 12 and even 14,000 feet there between the central and western Aleutians, and icing potential where there are thicker clouds and certainly some precipitation-bearing clouds. We could find some moderate icing above 12,000 feet. Eastern Talkeetna Mountains, western part of the Copper River Basin, and also back out here in that milder air mass where there's some showers, but you have to get way up above 16,000 feet, parts of the eastern central Aleutians on Thursday. Upper level wind field, jet stream level 30,000 feet, 300 millibars. Strongest belt of winds are out of the south, pulling up along the outer panhandle, northeastern Gulf Coast, 80 to locally 90 knots. Back to the west, we have northwest flow across the Alaska Peninsula and outside of Bristol Bay, 60 to locally over and approaching 70 knots. And then the winds out here out toward the Aleutian chain south of there are some winds up above, say, 65 to 85 knots. Now at 9,000 feet, 700 millibars, the low pressure circulation still very clear. This is a broad circulation that's been persistent all week long. And we have generally a southerly flow coming into Haida Gwaii, British Columbia coastline, and much of the panhandle curving back. More of an easterly, east-southeasterly flow along the northern Gulf Coast to just off the Kenai, locally 35 knots. And then out here to the west, a broader wind field because there's two low areas. One is already on Thursday afternoon, already up into the southwest Bering, and here comes the next impulse. That one has a stronger wind field ahead of it, 50 to locally 60 knots out of the southwest aloft. That translates more to a southerly wind flow at the surface. And then finally, looking there for Thursday, we have some stronger winds coming up just south of the central Aleutians on the order of 50 to 70 knots. And as I step out of the way, a little quieter in the Gulf, just a little band of 25 knot winds offshore, well offshore of the Panhandle coastline there off of Sitka, and then another area of 30 knots down toward the North Pacific. So the only real area where there's a threat of turbulence on Thursday will be out here toward the central Aleutians. Surface to 3,000 feet, we could see moderate turbulence, Adak, Atka, as a result of that stronger southerly wind field associated with the two lows that are swinging to the north. They're up in and across the Bering Sea.